Hello, my name's Gail Duffus. I'm Education Officer for Primary Science within Education Scotland. I'm going to take you through a presentation that I've prepared on how settings can engage with the STEM self-evaluation and improvement framework. I'll introduce the framework to you and hopefully explore how you could engage with it in your setting. There's no one size fits all with this, and throughout the presentation, if there's anything that springs to mind or you want to follow up on with me afterwards, please don't hesitate to get in touch. STEM is all around us. We use products and services developed by STEM industries in our everyday lives. In classrooms, I've seen some fantastic examples of STEM learning experiences which are engaging and motivating our young people. It's helping to broaden their horizons, allowing them to see a wide variety of STEM careers, and that in turn is helping to develop their aspirations so that some of them may consider careers in STEM industries in the future. But what about those STEM industries? We're actually seeing a real shortfall in the number of graduates available to fulfil roles in some fields of STEM industries, and this is really concerning. Potentially, this could mean that some of these industries are unable to bring in new business or to innovate in the way that they would want to. More broadly than just in STEM industries, a survey conducted by CBI and Pearson showed that nearly 50% of employers actually want graduates that have a set of STEM skills. That's important to them. So we might potentially be in a situation where we have a gap here between the number of graduates that we have in STEM industries and those that are able to fulfill actual roles. So what can we do about it, and where do we need to start engaging so that we actually don't widen that gap further? Thinking about our local situation here in Dumfries and Galloway, what I've listed here is a number of the key economic growth sectors for the area, and you'll notice that many of these are actually in a STEM-based industry. I've also included this recent infographic from the UK Commission for Employment and Skills, which highlights the importance of engineering in society and also in our schools. This might be something that's quite useful to share with colleagues in your setting or indeed with parents, and just highlights another example of why these STEM skills and STEM careers are so important. Back in 2017, the Scottish Government published the National STEM Education and Training Strategy for Scotland. It recognises the importance of STEM to the future success of Scotland. And this document actually sets out Scotland's plans for education, training and lifelong learning in STEM. The plans are set around four themes. Those are excellence, equity, connection and inspiration. And it's actually not too heavy a read. There's something in it for everybody. It talks about developments we can take forward in early learning and childcare, primary, secondary, community learning and development settings. And really, it's something that if you've not read before, I would encourage you to have a look at. So I've included the link to it here. And as I say, it's quite accessible, quite an easy read, but really sets out our stall, I guess, for Scotland in terms of what the strategy aims to do. One of the key actions within the strategy was actually to develop this STEM self-evaluation and improvement framework. And although it was released in 2017, much work was done before then to pilot it and make sure that it could be easily used by schools when they were considering their reflections and evaluation of their work in science and more broadly STEM. Two versions of the framework exist. This is the front cover for one version of it, which is quite a detailed version of it, and that would probably be used by those that are leading STEM, coordinating STEM or senior leaders in a setting, and a second version which I've popped onto the next slide. This version is probably one that I would encourage you to use with practitioners, and I'll talk more about how I've used this one and the previous version a little bit later in the presentation, but both versions will be made available alongside this presentation for you to use. The STEM self-evaluation and improvement framework is there to help you carry out that self-evaluation of your current practice and next steps. It's really helpful in stimulating discussion, dialogue, and really thinking about creating those actions towards a whole setting approach to STEM. You might see it as a helpful guide or a route map for your setting to evaluate and improve their approach to STEM, using the quality indicators outlined in How Good is Our School For and How Good is Our Early Learning and Childcare. When the STEM self-evaluation and improvement framework was created, it was created to actually mirror the quality indicators of Higgios and Higgy Elk. The framework is also aligned with national priorities and policies, including the STEM education and training strategy for Scotland, developing the young workforce, and the Scottish Attainment Challenge. So we've tried to bring all the kind of key drivers, if you like, together and allow you to do that reflective evaluation with nothing really being looked at in isolation. I think what's important with the self-evaluation framework is that we try to look beyond our own setting and start to think about how we can look outwards and share that practice locally and beyond. And I've seen some really good examples of schools and clusters engaging with the STEM self-evaluation framework and using that then to develop local cluster plans to take forward. What I'd like to do now is explore some of the quality indicators within the framework and just give you some examples that I've come across from working with different schools or from working with colleagues around the country that might help give you some ideas about some of the work that you could take forward. Before I do that, I just want to draw your attention to the challenge questions that feature throughout the document. Those don't come with every single quality indicator, some of them are bundled together, but you'll see at the bottom of this one, there are some questions which are quite helpful to try and tease out current practice, current actions, and to really start to get us thinking about what those key next steps might be for our setting. And so another route into using this document might be to actually focus on the challenge questions with your staff. So looking at this particular quality indicator 1.2 around leadership of learning, I'll just share some of the key examples that I've got from a number of different settings. Some of these examples are focused on early learning and childcare settings, others come from primaries, some from secondary school settings. But actually a lot of what I've tried to share might be applicable across these different settings, so always think about how you could maybe use them in your context. The first example I'm sharing here is an example from Denny High School in the Falkirk area. They were really keen to focus on that leadership of STEM and recognise the importance of having that and demonstrating that leadership at various different levels. So they have a STEM coordinator and link deputy head who's leading on STEM in the school. They very quickly formed a STEM working group, and as part of that working group actually undertook some practitioner inquiry work around STEM and gender balance, really to understand their local context and really what would be their motivators for change. A key part of their work around leadership revolved around training STEM ambassadors in the school. And these STEM ambassadors were mainly in S6. They were trained through the STEM Ambassador Hub for their area, and those ambassadors were responsible for a number of STEM initiatives within the setting. They would be running weekly STEM clubs for junior pupils, they'd be training up future ambassadors and in actual fact were involved in the recruitment process for the next year's ambassadors. They were delivering subject choice workshops, working with local primary and nursery settings to deliver practical STEM activities, and really trying to bring the cluster together and engage them in STEM at various different levels. I've included some examples of tweets throughout the presentation just because I think it helps bring it to life a little bit. These are just some examples that you can maybe have a look at. This is of course from Denny High again, but there are lots of other examples from elsewhere that might just help you get some ideas about what might be possible in your own setting. Moving on to the second quality indicator that I want to focus on, that's quality indicator 2.5 on family learning. I found that more and more schools are actually identifying this particular quality indicator as one that's been invaluable to them in engaging in STEM. Quite often they're finding that it's quite difficult to engage families in the school, and they found that actually doing this through STEM has brought a new level of engagement really that wasn't there before. So again, I'll just share some examples of this with you now. The first example I want to share with you is that from a school in North Ayrshire, and it's a school I've been fortunate enough to visit and actually see for myself what their learning in STEM and their journey in STEM looks like. When this school started out looking at STEM, at that very start of their journey, they were really focused on building the kids' aspirations. The pupils didn't really have very high aspirations. The perception in the community was that science and STEM really wasn't for them. It was hard. Employment prospects in the area weren't strong, pretty poor. The pupil population was a very high SIMD kind of 1 and 2 profile. And the school, not just the senior leadership team, but the staff in the school were really keen to try and build those aspirations and think about an approach that would be sustainable, but that would also really help kickstart this work. And initially, they wanted to target particular families. They wanted to think about the world of work and those aspirations and how those families could integrate and support within the school. And what they did was they actually got some parents involved in a working group for STEM. And those parents that were involved were parents perhaps who were thinking that science or STEM was hard, that perhaps weren't in employment, and they really wanted to engage those parents before they were then taking that out more broadly across the school. And their initial focus on family learning actually took place on a Saturday. They had a Saturday club for 4 consecutive weeks. An hour a week, families were coming together, learning about STEM. They had practical activities. They were able to get a tea and a coffee, and it was a really just a way to bring the kind of community together. And it was such a popular experience. It was so popular that there was a real demand for more to run. And in actual fact, the initial opportunity grew, and what they then tried to do was bring in a wee bit about kind of healthy eating, cooking classes and so on, really to help build up that community spirit. And a lot of their work around STEM then kind of snowballed from there. A second example I'd want to share with you is one from an early learning and childcare setting in Glasgow. Now, in that particular setting, it was very much about the STEM learning environment and how they could actually change the traditional sort of nursery environment to be one that was very much focused on STEM. So the physical spaces changed, even in their outdoor space, which was pretty small and pretty concrete, if you like, in terms of how it physically looked. They were able to really bring STEM learning to life in those areas, whether it was from hard hats or from sort of bollards and other pieces of equipment that you would find on a building site. Indoors, it was about having very open kind of sandpit areas, construction areas. Bringing all of that learning to life in that physical environment really helped with developing the kids' interests and inquiries around STEM. Because of the nature of the early learning setting, parents were in and out all of the time. And so when the parents started to see how the physical environment in the nursery was changing, the staff were then able to start engaging them and getting them to think about perhaps how they could talk about their jobs, their careers, and really identify those that maybe have a STEM focus. And so parents were quite willing to come in and talk about their jobs. Shawmore was even able to offer an open evening, and at that open evening, the young people and their families were shown how to actually make Christmas baubles using a 3D printer. So the young people in our preschool setting were actually able to lead that learning with their parents, with their carers, and show them how they were able to construct these baubles using a 3D printer. One of the other things they did, which was terrific, was had a kind of an open day picnic, where again parents were able to come in and explore the physical environment, ask staff how their children were getting on, and just learn a bit more about the setting's focus on STEM and the difference it was making. I've also included some other examples here that I've not gone into the same level of detail with. The first example I've given is actually not a STEM specific related example. But if you click on the link to Northmuir Primary School, it actually takes you to a series of videos that have been created by the staff there. These were very much how-to videos, how to engage with particular numeracy strategies, how to engage with literacy strategies. And I've had some examples recently with other schools who are now thinking about taking that further and thinking about how they can get the community to engage with some of their STEM learning, so how to engage with certain STEM activities. Other rich examples that I've seen on my travels would include the production of experiment boxes and STEM bags which are going home. And on the next slide I've got another wee example of that. But that's worked really well to try and take that STEM learning home and to kind of break away from the traditional kind of literacy and numeracy homeworks that are going home. Those have their place, but it's sometimes nice, and I know that parents have reported that it's nice to have something a wee bit different to do. And these kind of experiment boxes or STEM bags, which sometimes feature a nice sort of STEM-based story in them, are proving to be really popular among some of our settings. The last example there about using pupil equity funding was a really interesting piece of work that was carried out up in the Huntly cluster in Aberdeenshire. Quite a rural cluster where sometimes it was quite difficult to get parents to engage and to get parents to come in and learn with their young people. And this pilot's been hugely successful in running a number of family engagement sessions. There's been a real mix of these being run during the day and also after school to really hope and aspire to get as many parents through the door as possible. And it's been a really significant piece of work for them, and it's had huge impact in increasing the number of parents that have engaged with the school. This is now running on a termly basis, such as the demand for it. And I know that the practitioners who are involved up there have just been absolutely delighted with the response, and more importantly, the impact it's had on their young people. They're feeling really positive. They're pretty chuffed that their parents have been in, or their grandparents in some cases have been in to actually engage with them. They're starting to use the vocabulary more at home, and that's been then reflected back in school. So it's been a really positive and engaging session for all concerned. This is just an example of one of the STEM bags that I was talking about just a minute ago. This is a family learning centre in Glasgow, and they were able to send home these STEM bags with the basic kit inside them. And what they encouraged the young people to do was with their key adult, with their parent or carer, to actually do the experiments together and to then send back in little pictures or put it onto their Twitter feed to actually share the learning that they were doing. Others are doing that through using a kind of STEM learning journal and just recording what they've done and the experiences that they've had. But it's very much about getting hands-on with that learning. Again, I've just shared some other examples here from Denny High School about some of the things that they've been doing in that secondary setting to engage with STEM. And finally, this slide here, although it was taken from Denny, it just really illustrates that many of the things that we can do to help with our STEM learning at home are applicable across all of these settings. So there are things here that you could very easily be doing in early learning and childcare and in primary schools, and I know that a lot of schools are already doing that. The final example I wanted to share with you was around Quality Indicator 2.7 on partnerships. I've got some further examples here just to share on the next slide. Please check out some of the Twitter feeds that I've shared with you on this, because it does give you a really good idea of some of the careers and some of the opportunities that are being created for our young people. Just a few more examples here to finish off of some of the work that's going on. But again, much of this could be applied in some of our early learning and childcare and primary settings too. If we were together, what I would then encourage us to do is to take some time to look at some of the quality indicators and think about where you're at now. Where is that interesting practice that already exists? What are you already doing well? What would you want to do next? Where would you want to go? What could form part of an action plan? And in groups, I would encourage you to start thinking about those quality indicators if we were in our workshop session as planned. But there's nothing to stop you starting to look at those quality indicators and think about what might be your next steps, and of course, who can help with that. To finish off, I wanted to start to share a few examples of how you could engage with the STEM self-evaluation and improvement framework in your setting. I mentioned quite early on that underneath many of the quality indicators in the framework there are challenge questions, and I've provided an example today of just some of those quality indicators and the associated challenge questions in a kind of framework of its own, where we could start to look at what's already working well and perhaps what would be our next step for our setting. So starting to explore with staff or maybe in a working group where there are already examples or pockets of good practice and how we could expand on that. Some schools that I've worked with have actually set up focus groups and used those challenge questions in the focus groups to really get that discussion going and helping them to understand the wealth of experiences that are already in existence and where they can draw on that practice and expand it further. I think it's also an opportunity to engage with our pupils and to hear a bit from them about their experiences and the aspirations they have and the things that they maybe want to find out more about. I said that there were two versions of the STEM self-evaluation and improvement framework, and of course you could use those as is. I probably wouldn't focus on every single quality indicator in the framework. A lot of schools are choosing to focus on the same quality indicators from the STEM framework as those they are engaging with in their school improvement plan, and that would make sense to look at the STEM work through the same lens that we're looking at our general school improvement in. So it's perfectly fine to get your staff to have a wee look and reflect on the summary version, the practitioner version of this STEM self-evaluation and improvement framework, but equally you could engage with the more detailed document as you see fit. Finally, one of the things I just wanted to draw your attention to was a really useful tool that I've seen used in a number of different sessions, which is called Menti. We've used it in professional learning sessions to assess people's knowledge before and after a session, just to get that snapshot. But again, perhaps you could adapt some of the challenge questions or indeed some of the quality indicator statements and maybe use those online to really gauge where staff or pupils are at with their consideration of STEM. And that might just give you some kind of digital analysis or data set that you could draw on. But I'm happy to help explain that or work with you on that. I've just included an example of the Menti here that was used in one of the sessions that I ran recently, and it's just on a website. It's a free resource. You can download it and use it as you see fit. When we're thinking about the STEM self-evaluation and improvement framework, when a school's engaging with it and is starting to go on that journey with STEM, something else to think about is a new award that's been launched, which is the STEM Nation Award. And this actually ties in really beautifully with the STEM self-evaluation and improvement framework, and it allows us not only to self-evaluate and reflect on our work in STEM, but to actually go forward for an award. And there are 5 elements to this award which are just highlighted here, but my colleague Lorraine Ross has also prepared a presentation on the STEM Nation Award for part of the Dumfries and Galloway STEM conference, so take some time to have a wee look at her presentation. And I know some schools in Dumfries and Galloway have already gone forward for this award, and it's a really good opportunity to actually start to gather evidence of the work that you're already doing and the impact it's making. That's me come to the end of my presentation on the STEM self-evaluation and improvement framework. I hope you found it useful, but please don't hesitate to get in touch with me should you have any questions, anything at all that you want to find out more about. I've popped some useful links onto the next slide to help you find some of the key documents that are involved, and I've also given the team in Dumfries and Galloway some other examples of resources that might be of use. But do get in touch if I can help with anything else. Thank you.